What can Gonzaga do to get out of the dreaded 8-9 seed conversation? We're going to talk about that with an expert on today's show.
You are Locked On Zags, your daily podcast on the Gonzaga Bulldogs. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Happy Thursday, and welcome into the Locked On Zags podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I'm your host and longtime Gonzaga podcaster, Andy Patton, here to bring you news and updates on all things Zag athletics. Today's episode is brought to you by the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Stay with us for the Armada Team of the Week later in the episode. But, folks, I am thrilled to be joined today by Rocco Miller. Rocco is a bracketologist at Bracketeer.org and with the Field of 68. Here to give us some thoughts on Gonzaga's NCAA Tournament seeding, their overall resume. We're also going to talk about the WCC Tournament getting started here in a couple of hours, what that might look like for Gonzaga, St. Mary's, and a couple of other teams in that field as well. Rocco, your latest update, at least on Bracketeer.org, was on Monday. Gonzaga's resume hasn't really changed in the last couple of days, as they have not played since last week. You had the Zags as an 8 seed. That's pretty consistent with where we're seeing Jerry Palm and Joe Lenardi and Mike DeCourcy and a handful of others kind of having Gonzaga in that 8-9 seed range. Is that still here on March 6th where you have this Gonzaga team?
Yeah, I think it's getting pretty muddy, but I think that could actually long-term benefit Gonzaga. And I say muddy because, since that time, Kansas took another loss. Yeah. Mississippi State took another loss, a team pretty just barely above them. And then on the flip side, you saw BYU just come out and beat Iowa State on the road, which has their seed question. They might skyrocket up to a 6 or something. We have to wait and see some of these other teams take the court still. But I think the best news for Gonzaga is all of their, what I call hay, will be in the barn by the time the committee meets Wednesday morning. So the first, official committee meeting is that Wednesday morning, the morning after the WCC results are in. If Gonzaga, and we'll get to the scenarios in a minute, but if Gonzaga is the WCC champion, all they're going to do is watch a lot of these teams, like a couple of the ones I listed, plus there's Louisville, there's Ole Miss, there's Illinois, there's Memphis, there's Oregon, and the list goes on. And, the chances are pretty good that the majority of those, if not all of them, are going to lose next week at some point. And then there's this nice and shiny WCC champion ready to pass all of them. So I think the more that the waters are muddy, the better for Gonzaga.
Yeah, as I was watching hoops yesterday on Wednesday evening, and I watched Ole Miss get that upset over Tennessee, and I watched UConn get, I guess, an upset over Marquette. I think they were favored, but, two teams that have kind of been in that 8-9 conversation too. And I was like, all right, we can't have everybody bumping up to a 7 seed, but I do think that Gonzaga gets a bit of an advantage just in the sense of being done a little bit earlier while those teams are going to take more recent losses than the Zags, even if the Zags don't win the WCC tournament. But that's kind of what I want to talk about here is I know that it was after either the San Francisco or Santa Clara game. I don't remember which one. I know you had a conversation with Ryan Nembhard, and he kind of made a comment about you got us as a 9 seed or an 8 seed. Like, we'll see about that. But there's not a lot of time left. Gonzaga's got 2 games at most remaining this season. There'll be, likely a quad 2 and a quad 1 opportunity. That's the expectation, at least. So good opportunities, but, still just fairly limited. What do you kind of see as the sort of range here for Gonzaga? Last year at this exact time, I don't think anybody would have thought Gonzaga could have snuck all the way up to a 5 seed, but they did by virtue of some luck and some circumstances that benefited them. But this year, do you feel like that is the attainable number, or do you think a 6 is kind of the max, or even 7? Kind of where do you see this Gonzaga team potentially falling, depending on how they do in their next couple of games?
First of all, that was a funny moment with Ryan. He actually asked me a question. I'm not used to going to those things after the game and having the player ask me something. So I had to be honest about it, and of course, he didn't like the answer, but. Yeah, I think, there's a couple things to say when compared to last year. First of all, this year's team does not have the win at Kentucky. Yeah. That was a big-time needle mover because it was a road win against a team against the top part of the board. This year, Gonzaga's 3 tournament-level wins are all closer to the bubble. Yeah. Baylor's about a 1 or 2 losses away from maybe being out of the field, so they're clearly a bubble team. Obviously, Indiana's a bubble team. And then the road San Diego State win, they lose to UNLV the other night. So all 3 of Gonzaga's tournament level wins entering the WCC tournament are against very much bubble teams.
Yeah.
So I think that's an important point of distinction from a resume point of view. Now there's the other side of things where they are number 8 in the net. They are an average of top 10 in every predictive metric available on the team sheets for the committee. And so, there is that opportunity to continue to slide up. But I do think a WCC tournament championship is required for that, because if they go into those conversations with just San Diego State or Baylor being their best win, it's not going to carry a lot of weight compared to a bunch of these other resumes. Like BYU has won at Arizona, won at Iowa State. Illinois has got some huge road wins. Yeah. And I think the other part about this Gonzaga resume that's troublesome is 2 of the teams that are right next to both UCLA and UConn beat them head to head on neutral courts. They didn't have any of these issues last year. So I think there is a chance, especially if they lose the championship game, assuming they get by San Francisco or maybe an upset team, that they're stuck kind of where they are. 8-7. Now, again, even with a WCC loss, if it's a really good game, they lose to St. Mary's 3 times, they might still, based on those power numbers, squeeze into a 7. But I think that would be the ceiling. I think a win opens up those doors you were talking about. And I think the good news there is even on the, the bottom part of the 4 seed line, all the way that high into the 5s, the 6s, and the 7s, there's a lot of mixed results happening. Missouri just lost at Oklahoma. Marquette lost last night, as you said. And we'll see. I think Maryland and Clemson have established themselves up there, but there's room for these teams to keep falling. And I think if there's skepticism about those types of teams, it's going to be pretty easy to take a WCC champion, Gonzaga, who, if they win these next 2 games, clearly playing their best basketball of the year with the power numbers at least to back it up, and at least one pretty big win over St. Mary's out of 3 tries. You could get them. I think 6 is probably the ceiling, but I don't want to rule out a 5.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's like if Gonzaga beats St. Mary's in the WCC championship game, even if they blow them out, which has happened before, the exact scenario where St. Mary's sweeps them in the regular season, Gonzaga kicks their teeth in the championship game. This has happened. And it could happen again. I mean, Gonzaga's played very well against St. Mary's. I don't know that they'll blow them out, but I think there's they're projected by a lot of places, including a lot of betting lines, to be the champion here. But for me, it's like you beat this team once out of 3 opportunities. I still don't see a reality where Gonzaga would even be on the same seed line as St. Mary's. And for St. Mary's, they're a 6 right now. A loss to Gonzaga doesn't bump them up. So they're still probably a 6, maybe float around that 7 line. So it's kind of hard for me to see Gonzaga getting a huge bump. But again, you kind of alluded to this, and this is what I wanted to mention. The computer metrics versus Gonzaga's actual resume are very far apart. And I get why. I understand that they're factoring in the closeness of Gonzaga's losses. 3 of them were in overtime. They blow a lot of teams out. They blew out good teams like Baylor. They beat San Diego State pretty handily. So I understand how those metrics come to be, but it is jarring to see Gonzaga, 8th in the net, and to see the teams behind them and their resume and what they look like, and be like, oh, Gonzaga's resume just doesn't look that good. And so, we know the selection committee, they're going to have team sheets in front of them, and it's going to have that KenPom data. It's going to have the net data. It's going to have the Torvik data. They're top 10 in all 3 of those places right now, 8th in the net and KenPom. Again, as of now, that might change, but probably not dramatically between now and then. So how do you, as somebody who does this, who puts these brackets together, how much do you factor that in, especially when you're looking at a team like this, that there does seem to be this discrepancy between what has actually happened on the basketball court and what the computers are saying?
Yeah, no, I think all that's true. I think the other important thing to make is all the final scores of every game are on the sheet as well. And I think that could be important in a case like this. So Gonzaga is going to enter the seeding process. Obviously, they're going to get into the field, but once you get into seeding, these are some of the things you kind of look closer at. And yes, those 3 losses, West Virginia, Kentucky, and Oregon State, were all OT. They also lost by 3 to that UCLA team, by 6 to UConn, and by 4 in the road St. Mary's game, which was their toughest true road game. So I think all that is considered, but at the same time, the net model, all of that's factored in, which is why they're 8 in the net. So it's interesting because I feel like between, like, Houston was just in the American a couple years ago, and they had a lot of years like Gonzaga where they just thumped everybody, and it was impossible to seed them because they couldn't get the quad one wins and all those things that the top 3 or 4 leagues can get all the time. And I feel like these last couple of years, the committee has thrown a bone to the Gonzagas and the formerly Houstons of the world. Just for reference, coming into this week, I had St. Mary's as the strongest 6, number 21 on the board, and Gonzaga 30. So still one of the better 8 seeds. So if we look at it from that perspective, there's a 9-team gap between St. Mary's and Gonzaga. But if they go out and pound St. Mary's in the championship game, I think that gap could shrink enough to where they're both 6 seeds, right? That would make a lot of logical sense to me. And this committee, we don't know a lot about them quite yet. There are 4 new members on the committee, which includes Stu Jackson, I should add, the commissioner of the WCC. We love you, Stu. I know you're listening. But yeah, I think that's going to help a little bit. I think if that final impression, it shouldn't matter as much, but it does. And the fact that they get to play their championship game before voting starts, I think could really, really help Gonzaga. And that's why I'm not ruling out the 5 seed possibility.
Well, we know Gonzaga won't be the only WCC team in the big dance. We know that. We know St. Mary's is getting in, but could anybody else join them between Santa Clara, San Francisco? We're going to talk about that in just a second. But first, folks, the Armada Team of the Week is brought to you by our friends at Nissan and the all-new 2025 Nissan Armada. Each week, our Locked On college basketball experts are picking one team that stands apart from top-seeded stars to the unexpected upsets. These guys showcase the strength and sheer power needed to push their team forward. This week's Armada and clear-cut Team of the Week are the Houston Cougars. Since joining the Big 12 last year, the Cougars have gone a combined 33-4 in conference games, winning the regular season title by multiple games in each of the last 2 seasons. There is no team in college basketball that more capably embodies the rugged Armada than Kelvin Sampson's squad. Houston's tenacious defense leads the nation in fewest points allowed per game for the 2nd straight season. When it comes to the Nissan Armada, they say go forth and conquer, and that's exactly what the Houston Cougars have done here. It's clear that our Team of the Week is out here ready to conquer the road ahead with confidence, just like you can in the all-new Nissan Armada or any of Nissan's outstanding vehicles. Take the Nissan Armada Rogue or Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com. Let's talk a little bit more about the St. Mary's side of things. You mentioned them as a 6 seed. You mentioned them as the highest 6 seed right now. Obviously, the resume is fantastic. Picked up a few good, not like super elite non-conference wins, but they got some of the ones that they needed to get. None of their losses are terrible. I mean, San Francisco loss is a road loss against a team that has kind of floated around on the bubble. We'll talk about that in a second. And Utah State at home is not great, but it's also not a terrible loss either. So for this Gaels team, obviously a lot of the strength of their resume is on the lack of losses. The wins over Gonzaga certainly are helping them at this point as well. But with they're also in a spot where they only have 2 games remaining. Potentially Santa Clara and Gonzaga, or if somebody else can sneak past the Broncos. But do you see a lot of movement potential for them? I mean, you mentioned like if Gonzaga were to beat them handily, that may not bump the Gaels down too much. Do you kind of see them fairly consistently in that 6 seed range right now for Randy Bennett's team?
For right now, I think one of the best parts about St. Mary's is they only have the 4 losses. You couple that fact with the fact that they're 11-3 away from Moraga. And if you just take the top 2 quadrant results in true road games, they're once again 5-1. That one loss being San Francisco by 1 point. If that shot goes in at the buzzer, they win the game, right? So they were right there for a perfect road record. And so those are the good things. I think the thing you can pick apart about St. Mary's is the 2 wins they have against the field are Gonzaga. They had some unfortunate luck with Nebraska losing 3 in a row. Now Nebraska's out of the field for today. Right. So they just have 2 wins against the field. That's not going to look good comparing them to like Oregon or Maryland or Marquette even, or definitely Ole Miss. Yeah. You could even argue Louisville above them if you wanted to, depending on how Louisville finishes up. But St. Mary's doesn't have a bad loss and obviously dominated the league. I think 6 seed sounds pretty safe, but I think their ceiling's a little limited seed-wise as well because of those knocks against them at this point.
Gaels strike me as a 6 seed team that could absolutely make a run to the Sweet 16. I don't think there's a 3 seed out there that would want to face. I don't think there's teams, period, that really want to face Randy Bennett and the Gaels. It's not a fun team to go up against. But looking at the teams on the 3 line, every single time I see a new bracket, I'm like, man, St. Mary's got a good path. And it feels like they have a good opportunity to do some damage.
I agree. Yeah, I think that whoever ends up as the last 2 seed, it's been Wisconsin. St. John's is working hard to get up there. There's a couple others in play. Texas Tech maybe. From that point, so that's like the number 8 spot on the board, the last 2 seed, all the way down to about 14. Those teams keep just shuffling because they keep losing. And so that's if you're a 6 seed, that's good because those teams are not exactly winning consistently. And there might be some angles there to create some matchups against them.
You mentioned St. Mary's having just the 2 wins over teams in the field. Obviously, they did beat San Francisco. They did sweep Santa Clara. Those are 2 teams that right now are not in the field. I know that you have had them kind of in and out of the bubble a bit more frequently than maybe some other folks have, and always appreciate giving the mid-major teams some love. And I think San Francisco in particular had a resume that, outside of if they played a better second half against Clemson, that might have helped them a little bit. They struggled in that game, but it's like Memphis, Clemson are 2 very, very good teams, not bad losses by any stretch for Chris Gerlofson and the Dons. But obviously, I think last week, Gonzaga not only really helped themselves in terms of securing a spot in the field by getting those 2 road wins, but I think they were able to kind of really put the kibosh on both Santa Clara and San Francisco, who I think needed a win over Gonzaga to for Santa Clara to sweep against Gonzaga to put themselves in a more comfortable field. Do you see a reality where either of those teams sneak back onto the bubble as an at-large, or is it, hey, you got to win the tournament or else you're not making the field?
Yeah, I think it's going to be really difficult because some of since last Saturday's loss to Gonzaga, I'll talk about San Francisco first. Some of these fringy bubble teams are stepping up a little bit. We saw Oklahoma beat Missouri last night. Arkansas got a win, a big one for them on the road. And they're going to keep flip-flopping. We have a game coming up on Saturday in the Big Ten between Indiana and Ohio State. I think the loser will play themselves out of the picture for the most part. Indiana could hang on. Ohio State certainly would be out, but the winner is going to be in good shape. So you've got that scenario. You've got the power of North Carolina's athletic director being the chairman.
Yeah.
There's a lot of things. It's like, where does San Francisco get a spot? And then you haven't even factored in a bid steal yet, which annually we're about 2.5 per year. So even if we're on the low end and only get 1 or 2, it's still a spot or 2. And I think the issue with San Francisco's resume, they got 2 tournament level wins with St. Mary's and potentially Boise State. Boise State's like my last team in today. So that's iffy. But they were both on the hilltop. Their best win away from home, the only real major one they got was at Oregon State, which I believe, and you probably agree, Andy, was tougher than it looks on paper. They only lost 3 times at home. The other 2 were St. Mary's and Oregon. I think that's actually impressive. But I think, one of the things, I was listening to Dan Gavitt. He was on Field of 68 with Goodman yesterday and Doster, and he was talking about the top 2 quad records being looked at closely in the bubble. And I alarm bells in my mind immediately went off for the Dons because they're 4-8. So even if they beat Gonzaga in the semis, lose the championship, then they're 5-9. It's really not moving the needle. You'd love to add a neutral Gonzaga win for them onto their resume. Obviously, that makes it a lot more interesting. So we'll see. I'm not slamming the door shut, but I just think from a basketball standpoint, I really don't see them beating Gonzaga. I think Ryan Beasley, unfortunately, is going to be done. He was in the hospital Saturday night and didn't sound good. That's not an official thing at this point, but I think we would all agree on that. And they're going to be shorthanded in that tournament. And then we'll go to Santa Clara. So Santa Clara, I think, has got the most interesting resume in the country because they've won at the Kennel, they've won at McNeese. And again, if somebody's as big of a guru as me in the committee room, I really hope they're in there because McNeese only lost one time at home all year, and it was to the Broncos. I just think that's so impressive. Plus, you go to that Dan Gavitt stat, and the Broncos are 6-6. So it's like they're a little stronger there. If they get the St. Mary, they'll get a chance to play both the Beavers and St. Mary's in a perfect world.
Mm-hmm.
I would get them to 8-6 before the championship game.
Yeah.
Now, some of their numbers are way off. They're still stuck in the 70s and 80s in the most important ones, in my opinion, which are wins above bubble by the NCAA, and which is new this year, and the strength of resume, which has historically kind of been the most consistent one you can lean on if you want to lean on one. And that's very problematic. Now, I know the KPI is less often leverage, but it is on the team sheet. They've loved the Broncos this year. I think they're still low 50s there.
Mm-hmm.
I think they're worth it. If they get to the finals, they're worth a conversation. But again, for sake of argument and to set proper expectations for the audience today, I think they both need to cut down the nets in Vegas.
It's funny, I have lamented that Gonzaga's non-conference schedule bit them in the sense that a lot of the teams that they played were expected to be better. Baylor and San Diego State, notable win examples, loss examples. UConn would be a big one there. UCLA to an extent as well, although I think they've kind of performed as expected. It's just been the Mick Cronin roller coaster for them. But Santa Clara has a lot of similar situations. I mean, at the beginning of the year, in the first month of the season, neutral lost Arizona State didn't look terrible. And then Arizona State really just completely tanked in conference play. Nevada hasn't been as good as expected. I guess Stanford was a bad loss for them, especially at home. Washington on a neutral again. It's like that could have been an okay loss, but it hasn't aged very well. And I think that's just killing them. I mean, that's just like, and it was, I mean, I don't think I have no idea if the committee takes how much they'll take this into account, but I was shocked that Santa Clara, a team with so much continuity with Alpha Ball back, with you bringing Carlos Stewart back, with O'Neal and Tilly and everybody else kind of back in the mix. I can't believe they started 3-5. Like I was so shocked that this team didn't get off to a good start. And if you're 4 and area, I mean, maybe not 4-4, but if you're 6-2 in that stretch, like that's probably it. Like, none of those are horrible. I mean, the North Dakota State loss at home is particularly brutal as well. But yeah, it just feels like if they'd gotten off to a better start, the conversation would be a lot different. But unfortunately, they did not. And while they got going later in the year and have, I mean, San Francisco's a scary team. I love San Francisco. I like Coach Grillson. I like what they're doing. I suspect that any team who saw Santa Clara as an 11, like a play in 11, if they got in that mix, they're going to be terrified because this team can beat the crap out of you with their 3-point shooting.
They can, and they have a couple pros on the team. I think part of the issue, sometimes it's a huge benefit. Like they would not be able to beat Gonzaga in the kennel without their style. Like they play a very free style of offense, and it allows those guys to kind of play more of an NBA freedom of movement type of way, drive and kick, or just create off the bounce. And it benefits them in a lot of ways, and especially like when they're beating teams by 30 plus. But when they play like I was at the St. Mary's game in the Levy Center, the home game for Santa Clara, and St. Mary's goes on a 30-0 run. I mean, it's like, and that's because St. Mary's just figured out individually what do all these guys like to do. Okay, take that away, take that away, take that away, and they got ugly in a hurry. And I feel like Santa Clara did better the second chance in Moraga. That game was down to a 3-point game with about 8 minutes to go. So we'll see if round 3 helps Santa Clara make some more adjustments. But I just feel like their resume kind of reflects how kind of wild their offense can be sometimes.
Right.
And the North Dakota State one really, I know, rubbed them the wrong way. They blew that game big time at an 18-point lead. So it is what it is. But if there is a live Cinderella in this event, it has to be them for the reasons you said and kind of what I'm saying too, where they can make shots and really, if they get up by 15 on St. Mary's in the first half, that might be enough to get to the finish line. So we'll see how that game goes if they get there.
The WCC tournament starts this afternoon with San Diego and Pacific. So let's get into how this tournament might shake out coming up in just a second. But first, folks, get ready to bring your favorite Zags to life. VarsityIcons.com delivers the ultimate collection of action figures that honors both current and former Zags. Varsity Icons is the premier sports collectible figure for your Gonzaga Bulldogs. Today, we're going to highlight everybody's fan favorite, Ben Gregg. Varsity Icons was started by a longtime Gonzaga Bulldogs fan who wanted to create collectible figures of everyone's all-time favorite Zags. The mission of Varsity Icons is to create figures of current and former Zags for everybody to collect and enjoy. There's no question that Varsity Icons wanted to highlight Ben Gregg to be their first player. He has been a fan favorite at Gonzaga since joining the team in 2021. Ben exemplifies what it means to be a Gonzaga Bulldog every time he steps on the court. We are excited to create more of your favorite Zags in the future, so stay tuned and order your Varsity Icons Ben Gregg figure today at varsityicons.com. Varsity Icons, where icons live forever. Let's take a look at the WCC tournament then. We're about 3 hours away as we're recording right now from the tip between Pacific and San Diego, 10 seed versus the 11 seed. That's the only game on Thursday, and then the winner of that game will play the 7 seed, LMU. Winner of that game will play the 6 seed, Washington State. Winner of that game will play the 3 seed, San Francisco. This is how the WCC tournament is set up. It's not super unique to the WCC. A lot of other, especially mid-major conferences, have kind of done these like stepladder conference tournaments really to kind of protect and reward the teams that finish towards the top of the regular season standings. I want to kind of almost skip ahead to Saturday, because Saturday is when Oregon State and Washington State, Oregon State being the 5 seed, Washington State being the 6 seed. That is when they will play their first games in the WCC tournament. Oregon State will play either Portland or Pepperdine. Washington State will play either LMU or Pacific or San Diego. Do you expect both Oregon State and Washington State to advance regardless of who they play? I don't think that there's, we're not going to spend a lot of time analyzing the bottom half of this conference. It's just not that, I'm not sure that it matters who advances in that situation. Do you expect it to be a kind of chalk with Oregon State and Washington State moving on to play those top 4 teams?
The Oregon State, not necessarily, because I thought Portland was pretty improved in the last month. And, if they get by Pepperdine, they're going to want a piece of their local rivals. It's like Oregon State's little brother. So they're going to punch for the moon in that game. So that could be an interesting one. I'm not going to pick it. I'll take Oregon State, yes, but I don't think it's going to be easy if that's the matchup. Yeah. I think if Oregon State gets Pepperdine, though, there is a decent chance of that they should be able to handle them. Yeah. I think in the Loyola Marymount, I do think Pacific will win this first game. If they can somehow beat Loyola, that would be interesting because, of course, Pacific beat Wazoo twice. They could go for the trifecta. But either way, I think Wazoo's going to have a tough game because LMU's got dudes. They've stepped up in a variety of occasions. They've also laid eggs on a variety of occasions. So you just don't know. But I think Washington State has gone the wrong direction. They've been decimated by injuries early. They held on for a while. They were still playing well with the shorthanded lineup, but I think it finally hit them in these last 3 or 4 weeks. And you can see their nets falling out of the top 100. And like LMU, I don't even know how it's going to work in Vegas, but LMU might even be like a pick 'em or something for that. So, so we'll see. But LMU could make a little run out of that. And, who knows if Pacific can win 3 games, that'd be kind of crazy, but I guess it's possible.
Yeah. You never know. Yeah. I mean, Pacific beating Washington State 3 times in the same year and not having very many other wins would certainly be an interesting stat for this season. And Wazoo has obviously been struggling as of late. So I wouldn't be shocked if they don't end up being the team that plays San Francisco in the quarterfinals on Sunday. I could see it being LMU, absolutely. And I could see LMU giving San Francisco a game. I don't have their head-to-head results this season off the top of my head, but I know that, LMU's obviously, they have talent, they have size, they have some guys who could potentially give some problems to San Francisco, who has struggled with teams that have any kind of interior presence, has really been a big issue for the Dons this year. So I'm expecting, as it so often is, every year we love to try to look at what could change, what could be different, but it's almost always Gonzaga versus St. Mary's, and frankly, it's almost always the quarterfinals almost always end up being similar to that as well. Like it'll be San Francisco. It'll end up being the top 4, St. Mary's versus Santa Clara, Gonzaga versus San Francisco. Like it feels pretty likely that that's the scenario we end up getting. And while it wasn't designed this way intentionally, Gonzaga did much better against San Francisco this year than they did against Santa Clara, and St. Mary's did better against Santa Clara this year than they did against San Francisco. So it kind of feels like it's set up pretty well for us to get our Gonzaga-St. Mary's matchup. Yeah. You feel the same?
I do. Yeah. And I'm there every year, and I feel like I go to the same movie every time. It's like it's like watching Die Hard over and over again on Thanksgiving. It's kind of crazy. I feel like I'm insane, but obviously last year's championship game was a little shocking with just not the fact that St. Mary's won, but the way they won.
Yeah.
And, one of the things that came out of that post game with Gonzaga on Saturday night was, Nembhard told me that he's never won a championship of any kind at any level. And I got the sense, not only from him, but also Ben Gregg and Mark Pugh, that they are really locked in to just go there and handle their business. And maybe that's why the odds makers were watching those interviews, but they seem like a new level of focus to me. Now, I could be wrong, and St. Mary's not going to be an easy out in the finals if that's what we get again. But I am going to go with Gonzaga to win it, just based on I think with St. Mary's clinching so early, like an extra week early. And I know Randy Bennett's an incredible coach. I have nothing but the most respect for him. But I think there's just a natural tendency in sports when you've had the championship, you've already beaten this team twice. Yeah. You're kind of the fat and happy one, and the other team's the hungry one, and that's what we're going to get in that scenario. Whether St. Mary's admits it or not, that doesn't matter. I think that's just the reality of it.
Rocco, thank you so much for taking the time to jump on the show, man. I really appreciate having your insight, your expertise. Looking forward to seeing how the rest of the WCC tournament shakes out, seeing how some of your projections potentially change with Gonzaga and St. Mary's in that mix. But always appreciate having you on. Looking forward to our next conversation.
You too, Andy. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.